regionales del noroeste, que organiza en colaboración con el Departamento de Geología de la Universidad de Sonora. En esta ocasión, el doctor Robert Hildebrand nos va a ofrecer esta plática que está anunciada ahí. Tenemos muy buena traducción para las palabras.
¿Es Tardes de GEOCafé? Se la acaban de mandar.
Se llama Condición, Magmatismo Telosférico, y el origen de los Batolitos Cordilleranos en español, ¿no? Bueno, pues el doctor Robert Hildebrand, que nos acompaña y nos hace el favor de presentarnos la plática hoy, es investigador asociado de la Universidad de California en Davis. Y un breve resumen de su currículum es que es egresado del Departamento de Geología de la Universidad de California en Santa Bárbara, donde obtuvo su diploma de Bachelor of Arts, y su doctorado lo obtuvo de la Memorial University of Newfoundland. Trabajó por 25 años en el Ártico canadiense con el Servicio Geológico de Canadá, principalmente haciendo cartografía, y también ha trabajado en la industria minera posteriormente, tanto en México como en Venezuela y la República Dominicana. Ha publicado una buena cantidad de artículos científicos en las más importantes revistas de geociencias, y recientemente publicó 2 special papers de la Sociedad Geológica de América. Uno en 2009, que es el Special Paper 457, cuyo título es una pregunta que dice que si la subducción hacia el occidente causó la orogenia del Cretácico tardío en la cordillera de Norteamérica. Y después, en 2013, publicó otro Special Paper más reciente y con más información sobre el mismo tema, el cual tituló el arreglo mesozoico de la cordillera de Norteamérica, que es una revisión de toda la cordillera de Norteamérica, con todos sus bloques, terrenos, historia geológica, estructural, y donde plantea el doctor Hildebrand que principalmente la subducción que causó la acreción de todos los terrenos contra el cratón norteamericano, de todos los terrenos externos de la cordillera, fue una subducción hacia el oeste y no hacia el este, como generalmente se ha pensado por más de 30 años, ¿no? También más recientemente ha publicado un número especial de Geoscience Canada en coautoría con Brendan Murphy y Galen Albertson. Bueno, el currículum del doctor Hildebrand es bastante abundante en artículos que lo vamos a desglosar. Y pues con esta presentación le pediría a Robert que por favor nos presente su plática. Muchas gracias.
Buenos días. ¿Todos pueden oírme?
No.
Sí. ¿Necesito el micrófono? Sí. ¿Es mejor? Yeah. Ok, entonces. Ok, la primera cosa está, tengo un poquito gripe, entonces quiero hablar en inglés. Ok, si no hablo inglés, entonces simplemente miro los slides. Ok. La primera cosa está, wait a minute. The first thing is that this talk is a very broad brush, big picture talk. Okay? And I'm going to talk about a huge area of Mexico and North America and a little bit of Canada. The first thing is that people think about big Cordilleran type batholiths, especially the Cretaceous of Western North America, the Sierra Nevada, the Idaho batholith, the Peninsula Ranges batholith in Baja. They think these things have really thick crust. And what happens is you get magma all along the bottom of the crust, and it accumulates, and you finally build up great thickness of crust, which melts and forms these giant batholiths, much like people would suggest for the current day Andes. And what I want to suggest to you today is that this model is wrong. First of all, if you look actually at the continental arcs all around the world, what you find is that they have typically thin crust. They're zones of extension and subsidence. And if they had thick crust, they wouldn't be sitting close to the ocean, sea level, and they do. For example, the Cascades, Mount Rainier sitting right next to the ocean. All of the Cascades are very close to the ocean, no thick crust. The Alaskan Peninsula, again, many of the volcanoes are actually in the ocean. There's no thick crust whatsoever. Kamchatka, huge graben, 16,000 foot Gluchoyevskoye volcano, sitting close to sea level in these graben. Again, extension, no thick crust. Japan, same thing. We could say Sumatra, which is covered here. Again, Sumatra is very low lying except for individual volcanoes. New Zealand, very much extending, pulled apart. Central America, the Guatemalan, Honduran graben, everything's being pulled apart. Those volcanoes are close to sea level. Italy, they're right next to the sea. Vesuvius is right next to the sea. And the Hellenic arc, which is just to the east, Santorini and those volcanoes are also in the ocean. So the one real exception to this is the Andes. And the Andes was built upon an earlier Cretaceous collision. So that's why it's high standing. The Andes is probably the worst example to use for continental arcs. It would be much like using Yao Ming to tell you the average height of Chinese. Okay, it's not a very good model. So commonly what you find is that people suggest that you've underthrust crust from North America eastward beneath the Sierra Nevada, or the Peninsula Ranges, if you will. And the problem with that is you have no way to get that crust underneath there because it's really buoyant. It wants to rise. And even if you could get it under there, how do you melt it? There's no mechanism to melt it. So this is generally not a very good model at all. We use the international symbol. So arcs get thick when they collide with continents or other arcs, such as here in Taiwan. You see the Philippine arc. The Philippine arc here is colliding with Eurasia to give you the island of Taiwan. So what happens during collision is that the edge of the continent is partially subducted. It's being pulled down by the oceanic lithosphere because the oceanic lithosphere is dense. And it's pulling down the edge of the continent. Well, the continent doesn't want to be subducted because it's really buoyant. So what happens is the slab ultimately fails. Okay, now we don't know exactly where it fails, but presumably it fails in the area of the original rifted margin, which is the weakest lithosphere. And what happens is the stratosphere is able to upwell through that gap. It's a kind of a slab window, if you like to think of it, but it upwells through the gap and produces magmatism initially in the upper plate, initially within or adjacent to the arc. Okay, now this is a fundamental control on collisional origins. There's two extremes. You have ones where you have young ocean and old crust, and that breaks off at a very shallow level. The origin is quite narrow. Magmatism occurs extremely rapidly after collision. And you have other examples that might be best exemplified by the Himalaya, where you have India and Eurasia colliding. And there you subduct the Indian plate much deeper, And it breaks off, of course, deeper and later, so you get magmatism in a different place. It's also slightly different in composition. But these are sort of two extremes. So when the slab tears off, the trench immediately dies, and you go from trench deposits or flysch to orogenic molasse. And this is a major transition within every collisional origin, and it marks the time when the slab actually breaks off. So the main process here is asthenosphere upwells something like 100 kilometers and melts adiabatically. So Joe Whalen and I decided to look at let me first come here. There are several collisional events in Western North America, marked by these red lines here. And we're going to talk today about the 100 million year Oregonian event, which is prevalent in Mexico and on up through the northern North America, and the Laramide deformation shown above. We just don't have time to cover any of the others. The Oregonian event occurred during the closure of what we call the Bisbee-Arpero Seaway, and that happened at about 100 million years. So let's look at the Oregonian event first. Peninsula ranges. We'll head over to Baja, where there's great cardinal, and I particularly like going there and just relaxing. But the geology is really good there too. So the Peninsula ranges, as most of you know, is well exposed at the surface in southwestern California and northern Baja down to about the state line at Guerrero Negro. And it continues in the subsurface beneath the Cenozoic volcanics all the way down to the tip. It's composed of several different parts. Santiago Peak, Alocitos volcanic and volcanic clastic rocks shown in pale green. They're about 128 to 100 million years in age. And they're intruded by these 128 to 100 million year plutons, typically referred to as arc plutons. And then you have a major deformational event at about 100 million years, and then the emplacement of another suite, which we generally call the La Posta suite. So uranium lead ages at 2 sigma look something like this. Have all of the rocks on the upper part there were arc rocks. They were deposited and erupted during a period of subsidence. And then you have a 100 million year deformational event, quite intense. And then rocks, the La Posta suite, from about 100 down to about 84 million years deposited after that deformation. So the important point is that the pre-100 million year rocks are arc rocks. They're interbedded with carbonates and shallow marine sediments. There's no evidence for crustal thickening whatsoever, whereas the post-100 million year plutons were emplaced at 4 to 6 kilobars and were rapidly exhumed between 100 and 90 million years, as evidenced by detrital zircons in adjacent basins. The plutons of the arc are strongly deformed. You can see up here. These plutons are in the cores of refolded folds. The roof here and the floor of that pluton goes along here like this, but they're quite complexly folded. A feature generally not considered, but they are folded. And the blues here are Jurassic basement, and the blacks are the arc volcanics and sedimentary rocks. So there's a major unconformity going right through there. In fact, that unconformity is overturned. Anyways, the La Posta plutons tend to look like big zone complexes. Okay, they're probably deformed and folded sheets, but they look like this. This is the La Posta pluton itself in the US. And we looked at a whole bunch of geochemistry from the southern US. We looked at the red are the Santa Ana, or the pre-100s, and the black and grays are the post-100, what we thought were slab failure rocks. We said, well, what is distinct or different about the geochemistry? Because we felt that there should be some differences. We also looked at the San Pedro de Martir pluton in Baja Norte, and this shows the ages, uranium lead ages of Gastel and Dave Kimbrough and the sampling. So you'll see these various symbols on subsequent plots. So the geochemistry. These rocks which we thought were slab failure are quite limited. They're in the middle there, the Santa, the grays and purple. And you can see they range mainly between 60 and 70% silica, whereas the arc rocks span the entire thing from gabbros to granites. In terms of trace elements, they're also distinct. And we looked at the various trace elements and then tried to exploit the differences and see if we could come up with some ways that somebody could just go out and look at the granites and see if we could do some geochemical discrimination. And lo and behold, we made histograms, and we found that the two suites are completely different in terms of trace elements. For example, the niobium yttrium in the upper right, the strontium yttrium, the gadolinium yttrium, and the lanthanum ytterbium. So they're quite distinct in terms of rare element composition and also in niobium yttrium. So he said, aha, let's make some discrimination diagrams. So we did that. And we found that the rocks in red there are on the left are the arc rocks, and the slab failure rocks, or what we thought were slab failure rocks, are in the right. And they're quite distinct. So we took some other younger suites. We took the stuff from various places around the world, and we plotted up known slab failure suites, and they seemed to hold up pretty well. So we were pleased. Of course, the best way to tell slab failure rocks is still that they postdate the collision. Okay, arc rocks predate the collision, slab failure rocks just postdate the collision. So we were worried about strontium because strontium is a fairly mobile element. So we used these two plots without strontium, although you'll see us use both in this talk. But two distinct suites. Arc suites in red and slab failure. And we then empirically built these fields. We looked at Pierce's original fields for granite. And we found that he didn't separate out any things. He has arc and syn collisional rocks on the left with no separation. And then he drew a line on the right-hand plot in tantalum yttrium. But they didn't match our suites. Our suites look like this. For niobium yttrium here, and also for tantalum ytterbium here, we moved the line there. So these are empirical divisions. So the next thing we said is great. So we have both arc and slab failure rocks, and we had a collision. So where was the suture? Well, we looked in Baja, and people have suggested that the main Martyr thrust here it was a suture. The problem with that is the rocks are the same on either side. They're just at different grades. So that wasn't a very good candidate for a suture. In fact, this looks like to us a modified unconformity. Nevertheless, we looked over here, another major thrust, the Agua Caliente thrust here, which has all this gray ultramyelinite above it. We said maybe that's it, but no, the rocks on this side are the same as the rocks on this side, although I've colored them differently, but they're basically 164 million Jurassic granitoids. Same rocks. So we said, oh no, where's the suture? So what we did is we headed across, we restored Baja, we used the new data for that's showing La Posta type plutons down here where the red dots are. And you can restore it back, and you find that the same rocks are down here in Zihuatanejo, and they're all the way up and down the coast here. So we then found that, oh, wait a minute, there's a 100 million year collision here where all of these rocks were thrust over the Guerrero-Morelos platform at about 100 million years. And in the north, they were thrust over the carbonate bank in the Bisbee Basin. Right here, just to the northeast. If you go down to Zihuatanejo and down in that area, the work of Monod shows a beautiful example of a passive margin being pulled into the trench. Here you have a beautiful carbonate bank. Notice the scale here. This is 2 meters. And so it's being pulled down. You get well-bedded carbonates, and suddenly you start to get breccias with manganese coatings and condensed horizons of fossils. And then finally you come up to a little bit of the thing is completely drowned, and you get pelagic mudstone and then orogenic flysch on top of that. So the best way to think about that is that the margin rides up and over the outer swell to the trench, and then is pulled down into the trench and drown carbonates. Carbonates can grow really rapidly. So it needs to be pulled down into the trench and buried by flysch. So here's a beautiful example of that. And this contact is basically with the pelagic mudstone carbonate is about 100 million years old. And if we come up north, we find that all of these rocks were thrust over the west-facing carbonate platform, the mural limestone, and you have orogenic flysch deposited to the northeast as Cinturón, some of you might know. And here's the general scheme. It's a little bit complex, but the point here is that the Bisbee Basin and the platform here were part of the same basin, which opened up at about 135 million years here, reasonably well dated, and then closed at 100 million years here. Later, you have other rocks related to laramide, which we'll discuss after a little bit here. So this basin, the carbonate platform, is on the east. The arc is on the west. Subduction must have been westwardly directed. Could not have been eastwardly directed. Okay, carbonate platform on the eastern block, arc on the west, subduction to the west. And following at collision, you have all of these post-collisional plutons, the Laposta plutons, coming up in the range of about 100 to 84. Well, we said, okay, we have an example here of arc and slab failure rocks. What happens if we look at really young slab failure and arc rocks as proof of concept? We wanted to show that our discrimination diagrams actually work. So we took really young eruptions from 1912 in the Alaskan Peninsula and a few from half a million years ago, Augustine from 15,000 years, and Kamchatka eruptions in 1991, at Santorini at 200,000. And we compared them with the 200,000 and 500,000 year rocks best interpreted as slab failure on northern Taiwan. And lo and behold, our arc rocks all plot down where we expect them. Every plot, and the slab failure rocks from Taiwan all plot in the slab failure field. So we think that these are pretty robust ways to differentiate between arc and slab failure rocks in terms of geochemistry. So let's look quickly at the Sierra Nevada. This is another photo from the same place as the first slide was. This is Mount Whitney. Here, the highest mountain in the main part of the US, it's right there, 14,000 feet. Sierra Nevada also has all of these zoned complexes. There's also a lot more rocks at post-date 100 as well. But the big zoned complexes, the Dome Lands, the Whitney, the John Muir, the Tuolumne, the Sonora. And lo and behold, there again, you have the same age breakdown. In the west, you have pre-100 year rocks, and in the east, the post-100. And they're compositionally quite distinct. Here's the Peninsula Ranges arrays here. Here's the Sierra arrays there. Same rocks exactly, same age. And you'll see that the arc rocks in the Sierras, there aren't many of them analyzed, but they're in purple here and here. And we don't have full ICP-MS analyses of those, so they're not on the left-hand ones. Same rocks. And in fact, you can go to Tibet You take the Tibetan Plateau post-collisional rocks, you plot those up with the pre-collisional Linzazon rocks, and they also show the same geochemistry. And in terms of isotopics, neodymium and strontium, the arc rocks all fall up in here, above 0 epsilon neodymium, and the slab failure rocks plot down in here. Even the gabbros, this rock labeled as Onion Valley, which is here in purple, is a gabbro. And in fact, if we plotted ultramafic xenoliths that are dated to be the 100 million years, we find that they also plot down in this field as well. So the two suites are isotopically different. The important point here is that they both came through the same crust. They're right next to one another, sometimes intermingled. So one has to start to wonder, well, how much of a crustal input do these granites even have? When you look at these ultramafic xenoliths, you find that they're in the Sierra Nevada. There's none for the Peninsula Ranges. They're very deep. They show evidence of being having hot asthenosphere coming in contact with them at about 100 million years. These are minimum pressures, by the way. These are not adiabats. They're just diffusion gradients, because you can look at the temperature, see that they're too low for real ultramafic rocks. But they're cumulates, and they're coming from the garnet peridotite field, as opposed to the spinel plagioclase field where arc rocks are derived. So they seem to be derived from two different types of mantle. And when you look at the plutons themselves, all of these supposed zoned complexes, the Sierra San Pedro Martir in yellow has 4 different phases. They're all basically the same. Each little pulse seems to fractionate. In between, you look at the Tuolumne here in green, red, orange. Those are the 3 main phases. They're basically all the same in terms of strontium and rubidium. So each one is the same composition pulse of magma coming into the crust. And then each one fractionates a little bit, with some more than others. But and you see that for the Mount Whitney suite as well. Boom, boom, boom. Idaho batholith, same thing. It's another big suite in Nevada, same deal. So it looks as though each little pulse of these zone complexes is a separate one, but yet they're compositionally similar. They're not related to one another by fractionation, in other words. So what's the source of the slab failure magmatism? First of all, as I said, they come through the same crust. So the crust is not what's causing the differences. The xenoliths show that the slab failure rocks were derived from garnet peridotite. The rare earth patterns, that they're depleted in heavy rare earths, indicate that garnet was in the source. So we argue that the slab failure magmas come from rising asthenosphere in the garnet stability field when the slab breaks off. Arc rocks are derived from much more shallow depths in the mantle. Well, one of the interesting things before we move to the Laramide, there's pretty good mantle tomography underneath the western United States now, and underneath part of Mexico as well. And there's this 1,000 kilometer high slab wall underneath eastern North America. Ranges from about 1,800 kilometers depth up to about 800. It's basically a vertical wall. And with this, you can actually tell the polarity of subduction. This is a fast zone in the mantle, and it's interpreted to represent fossil oceanic lithosphere. Slabs have been subducted. I did some modeling with it and showed that the slab first would have encountered North America at about 125 during the severe, which we're not talking about today. But the main pulse of it comes in somewhere around 75, 80 million years. That's because North America was moving westward during the Cretaceous because the Atlantic Ocean was opening. Okay? Africa during the Cretaceous was more or less fixed. It sat in its same position, maybe moved a little bit, but in its same position. North America was moving westward because because the Atlantic Ocean was opening. So that slab that was under eastern North America today at 75 million years was underneath western North America. Well, that gives you the polarity of subduction, because if they had eastward subduction beneath North America, both North America and the trench would migrate westward. Okay, they go together as a matched pair. That leaves an inclined slab or a flat slab in the mantle, not a vertical wall. Only in the case where North America is moving towards a fixed trench with western subduction will you leave a vertical pile. Okay? Might be a little complex to think about, but that seems to be the way it is. Here's another way to look at it. Here's westerly subduction. North America is moving westward, and the stuff is piling up in one pile. If both the trench and North America were migrating westward, then it's left. Maybe it actually sits on the 670 discontinuity. But at any rate, it's certainly not a vertical pile. So the whole notion of eastward subduction beneath North America is probably wrong. Here's another example from another way to look at it, from the paper of Siglock and Mihalnik. Karen Siglock was the first to realize that you could tell polarity with the fact that it was a vertical slab, and published it in a Nature paper in 2013. And here's the current day Farallon slab here. Okay, another thing to note and to pay attention to is that large segments of western North America migrated northward after 70 million years. And I recently had a paper where I argued that the Texas lineament, which comes up through here, is the same structure as you find in the Lewis and Clark lineament here. And that these two should be restored, and that it was moved northward along faults in the thrust belt here. If you do this restoration, the Laramide magmatic belt, which is shown in bright red, comes up here like this, goes out to the transverse ranges. And then when you bring this back, we continue on up through Idaho and Montana on up and form a continuous belt. There's good evidence for this. First of all, that structure appears to cut the Calovian Upper Jurassic salt deposits in the Gulf of Mexico and separate them in left lateral sense. Here they are here, and here they are down here in Mexico. And that's the only structures that are actually show sinistral separation or sinistral offset. Okay, the basin and range is offset, but it's very much younger. It's just a step in the old margin. So if you look at the paleomag, the big problem with the Cordillera, of course, is the traditional Baja BC argument, where people say, oh yeah, look, some of these rocks in the outer part of British Columbia came from the latitude of Baja. Well, it turns out that all of the rocks in the Cordillera have moved northward about 1,300 kilometers, even all the way into the thrust belt. You find that they moved 1,300 kilometers. And this just shows us a summary of that. And of course, the sedimentological data from the Laramide 4 deep, again, late Campanian here, middle Campanian shows it migrating northward, the Maastrichtian, late Maastrichtian, and the vectors are shown to be like this. This is from the work of Ken Cataneo, the Canadian sedimentologist, and his students. So not only the paleomag, not only do the Laramide magmatic belts, not only do these structures, the Texas lineament and the Lewis and Clark line, but the sedimentology in the Laramide 4 deep all indicate strong northward displacement. So before you can start doing any reconstructions in the Jurassic, you need to account for the Cretaceous deformation. It looks like this. The Laramide magmatism coming up through Sonora comes up like this. It ends in the transverse ranges Picks up again here, so you got to bring all of this stuff that's west of there back down to the south. 1,300 kilometers. And at the time of the Laramide, just after the Laramide collision, it looks like this. Sonoran batholith is here, turns almost east-west, goes through southern Arizona, and then on up to the north like that. And it's this ridge, the Kula-Farallon Ridge, which seems to have come in around Limas and drives everything to the north. So originally, Coney and Reynolds looked at this and said, aha, there's flat slab subduction underneath Western North America. And they used data, all of this data from New Mexico and Arizona, a little bit from Sonora and California. And they said, look, it's flat. Well, of course it's flat. It's parallel to the tectonic strike, which goes east-west. So this is a classic case of somebody not understanding the regional geology and then creating a hypothesis which shows a flat slab when in fact the overall structure is east-west there. The whole origin turns east-west, so you collect your samples along strike. Let's look briefly at the Laramide event. We discussed it. It's generally considered to represent thick-skinned thrusts on the Colorado Plateau and the Colorado Rockies. This is at Maroon Bells. One morning I was fortunate enough to wake up in a brand new snowfall in the fall. And so I snapped this picture. But the Laramide magnetism actually goes all the way through Mexico from Central America, Arizona, and then continues on up through here and goes on up through Alaska. It also continues all the way down South America as well. So it's not just a small area of thick-skin deformation. It's a major collisional orogenic belt. And if you look in the transverse ranges, you find that major exhumation is in the roughly 80 to 58 million year range. See the old K Argon ages. If you look in the Mojave Desert, California, same thing. These rocks are being exhumed at that time. So you'd reasonably say, well, are all of these plutons slab failure plutons? They're coming in during exhumation. And you go up to the Idaho batholith, which is shown here, and the Boulder batholith here. These are in place, the tail end of Laramide strikes of Laramide thrusting in Idaho and Wyoming. Shown here, there's a little bit of the 100 to 80 million year plutons here as well from the Oregonian event, but the vast majority are Laramide event here. And there again, you have major exhumation between about 66 and 58 or so. And if you go up into the coast ranges of British Columbia, you find again major exhumation during the Paleocene. Big swarm of latest Cretaceous early plutons shown in black, and a number of porphyry copper deposits as well. If we go even further north, find the same peak of major exhumation. And you can follow it all the way out to basically southwesternmost Alaska here, into the Alaska Aleutian Range batholith, which are 75 million year granitoids. So if you went to this part of Alaska, except for the relief and of course the bugs, you would think it was just like Sonora. Well, so we looked at the geochemistry of some of these rocks, and we looked at the Coast Plutonic Complex, again, slab failure, the Yukon rocks, all good slab failure, Alaskan rocks, except for the granitoids, which are altered or strongly fractionated, and they move across this way, they lose their strontium. So you can look at, we looked at alteration and can show quite convincingly that even the rare earths are mobile during this kind of alteration. We looked at the Oregonian ones, of course, but here you see the Laramide slab failures in Idaho and Montana. All again, slab failure rocks. They look like this. Pretty straightforward. And if you come further down here, the Sonoran rocks, except for the Tarahumara volcanics, which are again altered or strongly fractionated, as shown in the red triangles here, they also all plot in the slab failure field. The laramide porphyry deposits, they're plutons who are dominantly there. Of course, they're pretty altered, but again, so we see the same features. Here's the rocks from most of the workers in Mexico, many of whom are here. We're stuck. Okay. I'm going to walk over there. Can you hear me? I only got a couple more slides. So we have the Oregonian event, 100 million year closure of a basin. And we have the laramide event, 80 to 58 million years. Most of the plutons that you see are, in fact, slab failure plutons. Next, please. And the most of the Cretaceous plutons in Western North America appear to be slab failure, not arc plutons. Given that the arcs occur in the upper plate during these collisions, most of the material gets eroded away and probably recycled into the mantle. So it may be that slab failure magnetism is, rather than arc magnetism, is what's produced the bulk of continental crust. Next, please. So associated with these slab failure plutons are copper, gold, moly deposits. Almost all of the world's lithium, cesium, tantalum, pegmatites occur associated with slab failure rocks, so they're economically very important. They can contribute 30% of the world's supply of lithium, 90% tantalum, and 100% of the world's supply of cesium. And most of the world diamonds probably come through subduction and slab failure, because you could take olivine plus orthopyroxene plus carbonate, and that makes garnet plus diamond. So slab failure rocks are really important. And I think that people have sort of missed the boat a little bit and not thinking about slab failure rocks as opposed to arc rocks. Next, please. And we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
¿Alguien puede prender las luces allá atrás, por favor? Bueno, tenemos tiempo para unas preguntas. Son bienvenidas, ¿no?
Yes, Doctor. It was excellent. It was very didactic. Yeah, Roberto. Yeah, my question is: besides the geochemical discriminations that you can use to distinguish the post-iron and pre-subduction plutonic rocks, is there any other, for example, petrographic minerals that you found proven to be?
No.
Not at all.
No.
It looks the same. So
Well, we haven't looked at all of the trace minerals. We haven't looked at all the trace minerals. And you know, one of the things that you have to remember is 15 or 20 years ago, people did not have the analytical ability to even separate these two suites. It's only since the advent of ICP-MS analyses that allow us to even separate. Okay, neutron activation is kind of iffy, and before that there was nothing really. So it's only recently. And so, no, we don't, in terms of all the major elements, except for this, they're a little bit higher in sodium, they're not very different. People have called them the same forever. They've looked at millions of thin sections of the rocks and say, oh, they're the same. But they're not the same. They're not the same geochemically.
So we're basically depending on the geochemistry of traces.
No,
No?
no.
Also?
I suggest that you use the regional geology. In other words, they post-date or are syn collisional. Arcs predate the collision. As soon as you have a collision, the arc dies. Okay, so there's no more arc magnetism. But you can see that they're exhumed. And they're in place during exhumation, maybe a little bit at the tail end of thrusting. So you can see that they're generally post-kinematic. Okay, and remember, arcs, for the most part, are erupted and emplaced with marine sediments. Okay, slab failure rocks are emplaced at depth and are exhumed. Well, you can even have volcanics, but they're in place during a period of exhumation and post-collisional deformation. So we prefer that. Joe and I say, well, we don't really want you to use discrimination diagrams, knowing full well that everybody will, of course. But we say, no, don't use them. Use the regional geology.
Okay, thank you.
Any more?
Great talk, Robert. I think I understood, I learned the Cordillera tectonics in the wrong way. Is there any evidence of the northward motion of the part of the Laramide Arc in Montana? I'm particularly interested in the Butte porphyry cover. This is the first question. The second one is if we wait until the end of the Laramide to make those slabs fail, then it opens a chance to explain the Sierra Madre Occidental volcanic province in terms of the slab window, the stenospheric window. But if you detach the slab at the beginning when the collision was, then we need to find another way to explain the source for the Sierra Madre Occidental volcanic rocks.
Well, I'll answer your last question first. I would argue that the Eocene rocks, which are beneath the Oligocene of the Sierra Madre Occidental, and Fred McDowell has dated several bits, and probably people in the audience here know that there's Eocene beneath the Oligocene plateau. I'm not going to talk about the Oligocene plateau. I don't know what it is. I haven't really thought about it too much. But the Eocene rocks are present up and down the Cordillera. And those appear to be late-stage slab failure rocks when North America migrates a little bit farther west. And we wonder whether that's actually the slab disintegrating and melting at depth and then coming up and giving you these Eocene. Because most of the Eocene is in place during extensional collapse of the Laramide origin. So we'll go so far as that. The second thing is yeah, if you look at the Belt Purcell, which is intruded by the Butte granite, that was joined with the Blue Mountains no younger than 100 million years. And the Blue Mountains have paleopoles at 93, indicating 1,700 plus or minus 500 kilometers of northward migration. So you have to move those rocks northward, and of course the rest of the paleomag says after 70 and before 58. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
More? I'm ready for more. Better get me before I go home.
I would like to know if there is any relationship between the Robert Mountains Trust and the large fault that showed us between northwestern United States and northwestern Mexico.
Well, the Roberts Mountain thrust is Upper Devonian and Mississippian.
there's any relationship between that fault that you showed us.
No, it seems to be part of the ribbon continent which stayed offshore and only arrived in North America during the Laramide. So, and I have, in my special paper, my last one, I talk about the Roberts Mountain Awakthon and all of those rocks and how they were assembled, mainly in the Jurassic, but there are some examples like the Roberts Mountain that are Paleozoic. So there were bits and pieces being assembled. And we actually think that there would be a relationship in a crude way. And that is that this ribbon continent that I showed you, kept talking about, but didn't explicitly say, oh, look, the ribbon continent, but all of the rocks that we were talking about sat offshore to the west of North America. Presumably, they were located over a long-lived zone of mantle downwelling. Okay, there's two zones of mantle upwelling, one underneath Africa, which is called Tuzo, and then there's another one underneath the Southwest Pacific. And these supposedly, according to Kevin Burke and others, think that they've been long-lived since at least the Precambrian. So there would have been a complementary zone of mantle downwelling in between. And we actually think that that slab, that big slab in underneath eastern North America represents this long-lived zone of mantle downwelling, and that it sat beneath the Panthalassic Ocean and the Proto-Pacific. So in a crude, long-term way, they're all related because they all accumulated at the same zone of mantle downwelling. And so you were able to build up this quite complex ribbon continent, and then in the Laramide it finally collided and the Panthalassic Ocean was no more.
So, what happened with the eastern part of the Pacific rise?
Well, it was subducted.
Yeah, but if it was abducted, you were saying that the subduction was towards the east.
Well, the East Pacific rise is probably subducted to the east. I mean, that's a much younger feature. You know, that's 12 million years.
No, but I mean the, how do you call it? It was the pharaon or something like that.
Pardon me?
The right side of the plate of the eastern rise.
Right.
I mean, now is the Pacific, the right side. What happened to that?
Well, all of that was subducted. Okay,
So it was eastward.
Yes, it was eastern subduction, absolutely, because eastern subduction started up after the Laramide. In other words, you collide the ribbon continent, then eastern subduction starts up, and you see that. And actually, it's probably northerly directed, because if you actually look at all of the magmatism in the Great Basin, all the hundreds of calderas and volcanoes there, they migrate quite steadily southward from about 45 million years to Las Vegas, and they meet at about 20, somewhere 20 to 12 in that range, with magmatism moving northward. Oh yeah, there's evidence. This is all pre all of this the eastern subduction stuff.
But it's supposed to be like the same amount of rocks to the right, the same amount of rocks to the left. So we have all the Pacific. What happened to all that plate?
Well, it was subducted. You have plenty of time to do it.
Yeah, but that's Cretaceous.
You have from 58 million years to the present, just subducted. So, you know, anybody have a calculator, calculate take it at 10 centimeters a year. That's, you know, you have plenty of time.
And what happened with the eastward union of ages of all the rocks of the
Which eastward union?
the peninsular ranges and Sierra Nevada?
Well, like I showed, there's two different patches. There's 125 to 100 million years, which are the arc rocks. Then there was the collision. Then you had the 100 to 80 million years, and there's a crude eastward progression, but it's not due to a single slab dipping under and migrating, as was originally suggested by Hathaway and Dickinson and others, 40 years ago. We've shown that they're two completely different suites, that the arc suite is pre-collisional and the slab failure suite is post-collisional. So even though they appear to be, there's one is younger than the other, there's not this nice, easy progression. The two suites are in fact, there's no eastward progression in the western suite at all, and everybody's known that. The only people have argued for eastward progression in the eastern suites, which does in fact get younger eastward, because North America is moving westward at that time. It's a bit of a fooler. You get fooled a little bit.
Muchas gracias por asistir. Muchas gracias.